Hi everyone, for today's featured ship we're going to be revisiting Sydney Harbour's Grandest ferry, the pedal steamer Brighton. This magnificent vessel was built in 1882 and it was the largest ferry on the harbour at the time, and in fact, in terms of dimensions, it still matches the current freshwater class ferries in terms of length. This ship was so big and so grand that it was very much responsible for the massive increase in tourism along the Manly shore and along its adjoining suburbs, and helped to promote that side of the harbour as being a place to set up home. With a capacity of 1,200 passengers, this ship was so popular that in 1908 it was actually fined for being overloaded. As you can see, the Brighton is quite grand looking. It doesn't even have to move to exude grandeur. The Brighton certainly had a presence. Its vital statistics were as follows. In terms of tonnage, not that heavy at 417 gross tons. However, in terms of length, 220 feet, which equates to roughly 67 meters, a beam of 23 feet, which equates to about 7 meters, and a draft of about 10 feet, which again equates to about 3 meters. The Brighton was built in Rutherglen, Scotland, and was launched on the 15th of December 1882. For its voyage to Sydney, it was rigged with masts and sails. Unfortunately, the voyage was anything but calm, with storms lashing the ship for most of its voyage. And when the storms weren't smashing into the ship, there was pretty much no wind, so the crew had to resort to taking off all the wooden boarding and using them to burn in the boilers to keep the ship going, and it eventually made it to Sydney. One of the reasons the Brighton was such a popular ferry, aside from being such a massive, strong ship with a large capacity, was that it was luxuriously fitted out. In one account, it even had singing canaries in the salons. Apart from that single mention, I haven't been able to find other sources referring to singing canaries, but we do have an account from Rutherglen just before the Brighton set out on her dramatic voyage to Sydney regarding how opulent the interiors were, and I'm going to read a portion of that for you. This account can be found in Graeme Andrews' book, The Ferries of Sydney. The main salon of the steamer is handsomely fitted out with stained glass panels representing well-known Scottish, English and Irish views. The first-class salon is quite equal in fittings and furniture, having large plate glass windows all around, shaded by silk curtains to match the sofas and lounge. The ladies' cabin, which enters from the saloon but has a separate entrance from the deck, is similarly fitted out. The floor is carpeted, sofas and lounges in green and crimson velvet, curtains to match, gilt-framed mirrors, a silver fountain with cold water for allaying the thirst of passengers. A large smoke room is also provided on the deck amidships, with the ship's bridge immediately above. The sponsons on the main deck are occupied by the galley, water closets, storerooms, etc., while the saloon deck gives a promenade of 160 feet in length by the width between the paddle boxes and is fitted with plenty of sparred seats. Access to this deck is by 4 good staircases. Being a very popular ship, the Brighton also had its fair share of incidents. Most dramatically, it had a serious collision with a coiler called the Brummer. A large hole was torn aft of the port paddle box, and the Brighton, once the passengers were evacuated, had to be run aground to prevent it from sinking. And this contemporary black and white image reflects the dire condition that the Brighton was in. Had circumstances been different, chances are the Brighton might be remembered for very different reasons. The ferry operated until 1916, when it was withdrawn from service. Based on some other accounts regarding its history post this period, there is an account that it was used as a storage hulk and a coal hulk for Burns Phillip, another Australian shipping company, up in Port Stephens. What we do know is definitively is that the ship did end up in Port Stephens, and if it had been used as a coal hulk, it was most definitely abandoned thereafter. The hulk of the Brighton was abandoned in a small bay inside Port Stephens that became known as the Duckhole. And for a while, this little area was dominated by 5 hulks. We do not know, aside from the Brighton, we can't definitively identify the others, but the temporary names for the other ships that are in this area are East Star, Dorobi, Sydney and Bingara, not the Ferry. We do have an archival photo from the 30s showing some of these ships with their superstructures gone but with their hulls still intact. And through the use of a very enthusiastic uncle that was up for an adventure and who had a boat, I was able to go and visit the wreck of the Brighton. And so now we're going to go over to some wreck footage. Alrighty. So here we are where the Duckhole is. This was once a shipwreck graveyard. You can see in front of us all that remains of the once grand Brighton, the largest manly ferry. As you can see, there's barely a few ribs sticking out. Originally there were 5 ships here, but at the moment we can only barely make out 2 or 3. As it turned out, as we were scooting around the graveyard and exploring all the wrecks, we could determine that there are actually 5 wrecks in this graveyard. Okay, so because it's low tide, we can actually identify the parts of the 5 ships. This is the Brighton, so then there's a stem of one, followed by the bow of another immediately in front. Then we've got this vessel, which is badly corroded. Then we've got the relatively intact waterline hull, and then we've got another one in between where only the stumps of the hull are visible. So that makes 5. That does confirm that in this shipwreck graveyard there were, and still are, 5 ships. This can only be done at low tide. We are pretty much at neap tide within an hour. And then after that, most of these wrecks, 99% of them, will be covered up. And again, you're looking at the Brighton. Alrighty, another perspective of this long-forgotten ship's graveyard, where we can see this freighter, local cargo ship. So we're coming up around the stern. You can see the remnants of the counter with the rudder still in place. And then obviously the Brighton and the other unidentified ships over to our right. As noted, the other 4 wrecks, it's very hard to figure out exactly what their identities are. That particular one that you just saw in the last clip is aside from the Brighton, the best preserved wreck. Its lower hull is still intact. You can still see the rudder. It clearly had a counter at its stern. But any identifying features are difficult. Would have to do more scans to figure out exactly what ships they are. And thus, therein lies what is left of the Brighton. Sydney's grandest ferry is now tucked away in the Duckhole, rusting. You can still tell by its fine long lines that this hulk was once the Brighton. But chances are in another 10 years, most of what you see above the surface will disappear, and then the wreck will finally be gone. But until then, we have contemporary images, some of the digital reconstructions that I've tried to create, and if you want to learn more as well about the Brighton, not only are there accounts in Graeme Andrews' Ferries of Sydney, but then there is also the absolute Bible, Manly Ferries of Sydney Harbour by Tom Mead. which has an extensive history not only of the Brighton but also of its many adventures, its troublesome voyage to Australia, its epic rescue of the Manly, and the severe collision with the Brunner. So there is plenty there for you to revisit more about the history of this ship. And if you know anything about the identities of the other 4 ships that are with the Brighton in the Duckhole, please let me know. I'd love to research and learn more about the other wrecks around this ship.